You're watching the Eternal Tournament Series. Hello and welcome back to the Season 4 Invitational. Round 1 is just closing up here, and all the decks are in, so we're going to be taking a look at the meta breakdown of what all the different players brought today.
We have an exciting and diverse meta, as per usual in Eternal. Lots and lots of different decks being represented from most of the different color combinations. We have a lot of Combre, a lot of Rakano. There's some Feln and Xenon in there, and of course there's some Stone Scar and Armory. So many different setups and lots of different color combinations, and everything getting a lot of equal representation at the current tournament.
Yeah, the most dominant, and I put that in quotes, or should I say, most popular deck is Team ET's Chalice Control, which is just a mere four players out of 32. So the field's very diverse. Everybody's on their own thing. Everybody has their own thing that they think is best. I know a lot of people predicted a fair amount of Burn Queen, but even that just has 3 pilots on it.
Yeah, I have my suspicions about the Chalice Control deck, but it looks like there's been a decent amount of other stuff. We are seeing a pretty significant exclusion of Elysian mid-range decks. It looks like the Chalice Control deck has more or less subsumed that particular faction type. And we're also seeing very little rally aggro decks, only Burn Queen coming in with less of the Grenadins that we're seeing so often in other types of decks. In particular, the only major Grenadin and token-based strategy is the Stone Scar Sacrifice deck that we saw earlier today.
Another notable exclusion is Shimmer Pack. Nobody is on Shimmer Pack of any of the colors, so all the Scouting Party copies are left at home today, and the Obelisk decks, well, there aren't too many of those either.
Yeah, it's looking like a pretty diverse list. We're seeing a lot of different decks, and it's mostly a list of Eternal's greatest hits. We have Big Combre, we have Traditional Armory, we have Burn Queen and Xenon Killers, and of course we have Feln Control and Rakano Plate, both making significant representation. There are a couple of newcomers to the setup. Feln Tempo has really made a splash, and Chalice Control has had a huge resurgence since it's the last time it was popular, I think, was closed beta. So it's been neat to see that back, as well as Feln Scar Control making just a little bit of a representation.
Yeah, Armory, not a deck that's usually too popular at invitational events. It has the odd weekly tournament where it pops up, but good to see those back at premier events. And Voda Combo. Big Combre has been the story of the last 2 invitationals, winning both actually. So only a couple players on it here today, though. So looking more to the secondary metagame breakdown, we have, well, the high end decks are the story of the event. Everybody's either mid range or control, and there aren't that many aggro decks lying around.
Yeah, it's a little bit less aggressive than usual. We still have the standard Unearthly Rakana going on, as well as the standard Bird Queen, both positioned to try and steal the decks from the control archetype, which is, as particular, just as usual, just the dominant representation at the Invitationals. So there's a decent amount of aggro, but not as much as you'd expect, about 25% if you count the burn decks.
Yeah, we got a couple of rogue decks for you guys here. Well, we say rogue, but these are what's going in the other category. We have Shed on a Combre Killers deck, which is it looks like a regular Combre mid-range deck, but it's playing stuff like Predator's Instinct and Dark Return, and hopefully we can get that up for you guys a little bit sooner. He did lose his round 1 to Chalice, so we'll have to see if he can bounce back. Ilunga we saw on stream with that Stone Scar Sacrifice. Quincy was playing the unstable version of the Feln aggro list, one of the two. I believe the other one does not play the unstable form. Calendir is on a very spicy Feln Scar Reanimator control style. Absolute. It's a mess of a deck, and I love it. And when it goes off, it's incredibly powerful. He actually won his round 1, so we'll be seeing him again later in the event.
Yeah, speaking of messes of decks that I love, Idwe Onque is playing Rising Daggers, or a Fire Time Justice Quartermaster deck. And the objective here appears to be to rise to the challenge for Ornamental Daggers, which gets you 2/3/1 daggers to put on your Silverwing Familiars. It's a pretty fun style of deck. It's an archetype that we haven't seen much representation from, and I'm curious to see if it'll be good in this particular matchup.
Well, I have to thank you for pronouncing that name for me, as I am notorious for butchering the pronunciation. But I think that's really cool. We see Rise to the Challenge used to go for big stuff like Ikaria, Daisho, things like that. We've seen it used for more mid-range stuff, Throne Wardens and Orc Runehammers and things, and even tech cards. Like sometimes we've seen Rise for Statuary Maiden or Steward of the Past, and now we're finally seeing it rise for the little stuff, the ornamental daggers here. So just all kinds of combos you can do with that card.
Yeah, it's nice to have a card that generally provides a break in tempo actually provide you with some real advantage. So it's possible to get some decent stuff out of it. And I think that that might be something that we see a little bit more of in set one before it disappears into the night. We are almost into Omens of the Past and just a couple more weeks out, I'm guessing, at this point.
No exact date, but we're all hotly anticipating it, I'm sure.
Uh-huh.
Moving on now from the decks, the aReNGee Eternal crew made some top 8 predictions. Now, we did this last time, and I was 1 for 8 on my predictions, so that didn't go very well. I'm hoping to do a little bit better of a job here, um, but both Rekenner and Lights Out Ace had pretty reasonable performances. I think they were about 4 for 8, around there. So the three of us, we all think that Unearthly, Sarius, and Sir Rhino are going to make it. And then there's a variety of other picks that we're a little bit split on. My personal pick that I don't believe that anybody else had was Paradox. I think he's an aggressive player and he's going to do pretty well at this event with everybody up on control. Going low to the ground should be effective. Rekenner's a believer in the Ski J, which makes sense. He's been up around top 20 ladder a bunch, been streaming every day to put a lot of practice into it, and I don't think he's a bad choice. I look forward to seeing how well he does. And Lights Out Ace is a believer in Manus, the YouTube ladder star that moved on to tournament play pretty recently. So we'll be checking back in with those predictions as players get eliminated and qualify for top 8 to see who ends up being the successful players.
Yeah, should be an interesting time. So let's go into the featured matchup for today. We have Sir Rhino versus Toth 201. Rhino playing a Combray archetype that he made top 8 with and won a tournament with, I believe, last time around. And Toth coming back with another Combray deck, a big Combray style.
Yeah, this is a really important matchup, not just for the players themselves, of course, as both of these players are expected to do pretty well, but also for the predictions, as Sir Rhino is on everybody's top 8 list, so if he is eliminated here, that is one down for us. And Lights Out Ace also has Toth, so regardless, he's going to be losing one of his predictions. Rhino did play this deck to his tournament win in one of the weeks, and I believe he swept the entire bracket, went totally undefeated, and made it the morning of. So running it back.
Yeah, and Toth's Combray deck is Ikaria Gold, so we are seeing one Ikaria in the deck, as well as some Rise to the Challenges and a couple of little splash cards. For the most part, it's meaty and full of interesting big units, but you can see there's also there's some low to the ground stuff here as well. Mystic Ascendant is only a 1-of, and Ikaria is also only a 1-of. So Toth is really pressing on the early advantage and the early tempo here as well. So these decks are fairly evenly matched in terms of tempo.
Yeah, Toth, of course, one of the Ikaria Gold creators, and he's been playing that since time immemorial. Well, not quite, but for a few months now, so he's got it pretty tuned the way he likes it.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting setup. It's always nice to see someone going a little light on the Ascendants to make room for other stuff. I think that's a really interesting meta call. Mystic Ascendant is a card that is very slow and clunky, but wins so many control matchups that oftentimes people do not like to play less than 4 of them. So when you see 3 Iron Thorns, 1 Mystic Ascendant, you can definitely hope that the rest of the deck is tuned to be a lot more aggressive. And with Auric Runehammers and Sandstorm Titans and all of the early aggression going on here with Awakened students, Toth's deck might actually have a pretty good chance against Rhino's more aggressive deck using the Marison's Disciples and Overseers and Owlets to push really aggressive flyers.
All right, so we're going down into the match, and Sir Rhino looks like he's got quite the reasonable aggressive start here, with 3 Awakened students, it looks like, although no power to back them up.
Yeah, it's a bit rough here. He gets Diplomatic Seal to throw down a green, and that means he'll be able to play Awaken the Student. But there is a kind of weird anti-synergy here between Initiate and Awaken Student, where you don't actually get to play Awaken Student into a power unless you have a banner or a seat. So he instead sets up Awaken Student there, and from there it's just pretty rough. He's got a lot of aggressive 2-drops to play, and Toth is looking at more of a mid-range archetype with Seraph into Titan, into Parliament, into Icaria. This is the overall just mid-range style.
Well, lucky Sir Rhino draws a sigil immediately and is able to get those awakened students going, but he's not quite able to attack through here and chooses instead just to deploy all the awakened students as soon as he can and get ready for the obelisk turn.
He's definitely pushing a very, very good board, but Toth does have a very good defensive lineup against that board. Sandstorm Titan is the pretty obvious choice here. It trades well with Awakened students and just makes it pretty hard for Rhino to attack in. Toth will eventually have to clear this board out with some sort of spell, but it's going to be a little bit tricky to get there. And in the meantime, he's got to contend with these guys just getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Now, it is important to note that Toth is not actually playing any copies of Harsh Rule in the main deck. He's full creature based or unit based and isn't really relying on spells. So he needs his guys to be beefier than Sir Rhino's guys, or he's going to be in trouble.
Yeah, Sir Rhino with the one of the better answers to Sandstorm Titan, the ever common Finest Hour, a really strong card if you want to be pushing through. Toth sees the Finest Hour coming and does in fact double block. Rhino can choose to ignore the Finest Hour here and just take out the Seraph, which I think gives him a little bit better advantage against the Sandstorm Titan later and allows him to play out one of his 4-drops instead.
Yeah, next turn he's going to have an obelisk plus finest hour turn, and it is going to be rough for Toth to come back.
Yeah, choosing the Sand Crawler off of Marison's Disciple just to get more meat. Rhino really wants to win this game fast. He wants to push his advantages before Icaria comes down and start swinging the game in Toth's favor. And with the Obelisk in hand and 5 units on board, it's looking like he's going to have a pretty good chance at that.
Yeah, he's really set up well. This would be a terrifying hand against like a more harsh roll focused deck, because just harsh roll on this board and you're down to nothing in hand. But since your opponent's playing with only units, it's a lot more likely that you're going to be able to push through all the damage. And here we see just a 4/4 owl isn't going to match up that well when the Xenon obelisk comes down.
Yeah, there's not going to be much that he's going to be able to block with it, and he still has to deal with the Finest Hour as well. So wherever he chooses to block here, he's probably going to lose both units, leaving him with an empty board. He needs to draw a Harsh Rule, or pretty much is going to be dead in the water,
Well,
and
he
I'm
can't.
not
He doesn't play
certain that
harsh
he
rule.
has one in his deck. Yeah, he's not playing Harsh Rule, so he really doesn't have a lot of good options against this deck at the moment.
Hmm. If he draws one of his more expensive cards, maybe he can then get to Icaria and survive a little bit. But it's going to be a big ask. He
Rhino
does get to
choosing
Vanquish.
Rhino chooses not to attack with his 3/3 and his 2/2, instead just clearing out the board of threats with an aggressive attack. I think this play does mean that he keeps a little bit more on board, but he could potentially lose a lot more later in the game as a result of not being able to press his advantages and win the game quickly. Seed of Impulse for Toth picks up the Icaria. That's a card that he actually does really need right now. Being able to play that means that he now has good defense against the 4/4 unit. And he is prevented from taking lethal, except Desert Marshal comes down, and that should just be game.
Rhino sequencing. He could have protected the Icaria, silenced it with the Desert Marshal, and it would have been back to block. But just the power on board is enough, and it doesn't actually end up changing the game state. But
Yeah.
another sequencing error from our players.
I think he had lethal, and he held the card to basically just hide the fact that he had it. But it's hard to say for sure. In general, you don't want to show your opponent more of your hand than you have to, so that they don't sideboard against cards that you haven't played yet. So we are looking at the sideboards for this game. Sandstorm Titans, Reality Wardens, Healers, Cloaks, and Combre Healers are all in Sir Rhino's sideboard. So he can choose to make this deck a little bit more mid-range, but that seems unlikely to be effective. He's more likely to cycle in the Protects and Vanquishes and just keep his own units defended, as he does basically the same thing, just pushes the aggro side and becomes the beatdown.
Yeah, you're not really going to beat this deck if you try to go up the scale and compete with them, since they have a lot more beef than you do. So I think you're right, and he will stick with a more aggressive plan. From Toss side, he's got protects of his own, but I don't know if you're going to be able to bring in protects and stand togethers when what you really need is units to put in the way.
Yeah, there's not a lot in Toss side that's looking particularly well suited against this type of aggro deck. Stand Together's okay, and Combre Healer is also kind of okay. It's not amazing. The main thing is that it is a card that, while it gains you health, doesn't actually defend very well against most of the things that Rhino's bringing to the table. It protects enough against small tokens and gains you enough health that it might be worth a side, especially since it lowers Toss curve even further. But really, Toth is not looking at a fantastic amount of good cards against Rhino's deck. The Ruins are the most important one, just to smash those Xenon Obelisks. They're an important enough card that it might be worth bringing those in.
Furnace Mage is a pretty good hedge in that it can also block in a pinch. And I imagine those Combo healers will be coming in. But like you said, it looks like Toth just isn't set up well for this matchup. Like, he's got some units that he can put in play, but all of them are answered by Vanquish, and Rhino's just going to come out so much faster than what Toth is expecting.
Yeah, on the other hand, Toth does have some aggro of his own. He is running the Awakened Students. He is running his own Desert Marshals. Like, if he can just draw more Awakened Students than Rhino, that does provide him with a similar aggro position to what Rhino is doing. And just being first in that matchup, having Awakened Student out, that could actually be pretty solid for him. I think that there is actually a decent amount of aggro already in Toth's main board, but it's hard to say if he's able to present enough aggro to become the beatdown in any situation.
And we are moving now into the game, and Rhino once again with his Awakened Student, and Toth once again with no 2-drop.
Reinforcer this time, which when you're on the play is really, really effective against Awakened Student, because you get to both silence it and generate a 3/3 blocker against it. And that tends to be very effective for just slowing the deck down and getting a little bit further into the game. We see Rhino playing out his Awakened Student. That seems like the obvious turn 2 play. He could go for Eager Owlet, but there's no flyers to back it up, so there's not a strong reason to play a card that isn't going to be aggressive on that turn. He does lose the Awakened Student to the 3/3, and now he's in a bit of a blockade. He can choose to Valkyrie Enforcer or Seraph. Either one will push through the 3/3.
Seraph would be the card that I'd suspect that he would play here. Chooses instead to go for the Enforcer, perhaps looking to set up the Owlet a little better with the Flyer. But Toth is looking a lot better in this game. He's not under nearly as much pressure. There was no Initiate of the Sands into triple 2-drop from Sir Rhino, and he's got enough stuff in his hand that he's going to be able to should be able to stall the board out enough to get up to that Mystic Ascendant.
Yeah, Eager Owlet's going to be a tricky card for him in general. If Toth has any amount of Desert Marshals, they're really good answers to Owlet because they can silence the flyers that the Owlet is trying to leech off of. And if you can keep those flyers under control, Owlet just doesn't do anything. It stands there on board. It's a dead card. So there are enough answers, I think, to flyers in Toth's deck that Owlet might be pretty tricky. But at the moment, they aren't presenting themselves. So Rhino can play Owlet if he wants to.
And hold up Desert Marshal. Otherwise, he might also decide to go develop the Marison's Disciple, just spread the board a little bit more. But with the ground kind of gummed up, it is an interesting decision, as there's no immediate Desert Marshal target. But if Toth decides to go for this Parliament here, I expect we'll see the Marshal to come down and keep the skies clear, as it were.
Yeah, it's not a bad decision overall. It definitely gets him a lot of aggression over the top, and the damage that he deals is really important here, especially since he lost his Awakened Student early. He doesn't have as much pressure on the ground, and he's facing some pretty serious blockades. Toth is going to eventually take control of the late game with that Mystic Ascendant and the larger cards that he's running, but all of Rhino's stuff right now is below Vanquish and currently charging in for 6 a turn.
Yeah, and you got to be really careful about playing the Ascendant just on 6 because you can't activate it. So Rhino's going to be able to crash in for 6 a turn at least once more if Toth doesn't draw anything here.
He generates the backup Locust to get him a little bit more damage in the air. This puts Toth on a 2-turn clock in the air, and also means that Desert Marshal no longer stops the Owlet from being just a useful card. You can either silence the Owlet or you can silence one of the other flyers, but either way, you're only nixing 3 damage and not a full 6. So at this point, he has the wide board. Toth attacking with his 4/4, but Toth is not the beatdown here, so Rhino might just let that through.
That's a very aggressive attack if he decides to go for it. I think you need to play the Mystic Ascendant here. That Seek Power was a bad enough draw that you just, like you said, he's on a 2-turn clock, so if he just goes Mystic Ascendant Power next turn, he's going to die. He may just die here to this Xenon Obelisk draw, though.
Yeah, Rhino has the option to Vanquish and play a Seraph if he wants to, but Obelisk is just the better play here. So Toss attack does work out. He still has 3 blockers on the ground, which means he gets the 4 damage for free, but I mean, at this point, he's still on the 2-turn clock from the air, and there's just nothing in his deck that deals with 3 flyers simultaneously. And even dealing with 2 is going to be a tall ask.
Oh, well, there's something that deals with 3 flyers simultaneously. Sandstorm Titan comes down to save the day. Except Sir Rhino has a Vanquish, so it doesn't really.
Yeah, 1 Vanquish gets rid of 1 flyer, Sandstorm Titan locks down the board, and then Vanquish unlocks it, and Rhino will be taking this game home. Toth is dead but doesn't know it at the moment, and we are going to be probably looking at a game 2 very shortly. Toth weighing his options. He does have a decent series of attacks that actually deal a significant amount of damage. That 4 damage from the Owl does mean that he can pressure quite a bit. If he does that and then presents a Sandstorm Titan as a defender, that would be kind of a decent play because he does force blocks, I believe, if he attacks at least 1 block. Him with another blocker, but either way it would be lethal. There's not really a good play here, so just weighing his options, and Rhino will quickly undo everything that Toth has done and swing in for the flyer victory.
Really unfortunate that Toth was doing everything he could to maximize his outs there, and we just knew it didn't matter because of the Vanquish. And then a Desert Marshal draw for the Rubbins. So Toth will fall 2-0 to Sir Rhino.
That Owl was eager for face damage, and that is it for Toth. So he will get knocked out of the loser's bracket, and from there we will see Sir Rhino advancing to the next round.
Yeah, and I just got word, I believe, that Ilya K also was defeated by Bradykin. So that's 2 VPX members out of the tournament in short order.
As fast as you can go, 2 games, and they're gone. So we are now seeing Sir Rhino moving on, and we'll see if he can pull it back from the loser's bracket as he advances up to the next round.
Yeah, well, since he's in my top 8, I'll of course be cheering for Sir Rhino internally. Hopefully, he can make the long climb in the bracket. But players who lose in round 1, they've got a big, tall ask to make it up to top 8. 5 rounds ahead of them instead of just the 3 for the winners of the first round.
Yeah, I think Rhino's deck is positioned extremely well against all of the sort of stable meta picks. He's picked something that is very good against decks that are predictable and easy to run against. I'm not sure what he ran up against in round 1, but for the most part, he has a deck that's a good mix of aggro and defensive, similar to the Felm Tempo archetype. So he has a good chance to advance against all of the decks that are more common. And really the question is, are any of the surprise decks going to advance to the point in the losers bracket where they can knock Rhino out? Because I think that some sort of sneaky trick or something that's a little bit better against these type of aggressive decks could really be bad news for him. So it's going to depend heavily on his matchups.
Looks like Finest Hour is just a very good card for this tournament. You've got the Felonscar and the Felon that have the ways to answer it, but stuff like Armory and Combre and Chalice, they're really on the Vanquish plan. So they're if you've got a 3/3 plus a Finest Hour, you're going to be able to hit in for 6, and they don't really have a good answer for those.
Yeah,
Same with Rapano.
It's a very solid archetype. I think that generally just going under Vanquish is really nice. You have some good hybrid cards, so it's harder to annihilate them. Awakened Student and Desert Marshal and Combre Healer all present pretty nice. There's just a lot of good ways to be evasive here without actually being evasive. The Combre deck, while being very straightforward, is immune to a lot of the common removal that is used to dispense with more greedy and more generally tricky targets.
Yeah. So round 2 is coming to a close. So we're going to be losers bracket round 1 is moving to a close, and we're going to be moving to a break now, and we will be back, jumping back up to winners bracket round 2. So until then.
See you guys then.